Huion has sent me two of their newest devices which attempt to tackle the iPad Pro artist territory head-on. This is the Huion Slate. As some of you know, I recently travelled to the UK where I attended Makers Central and was over there for weeks travelling and sightseeing, but of course I never stopped working. So it was a great opportunity to take these devices built specifically for taking your art with you on the go and see how they held up to the demands of my work. We also set up our in-house artist Alicia with the device to see how it handles under a professional workflow over several days, so there's lots to get into. Now this video is sponsored by Huion, whom I have worked with for many years. However, I will be sharing all of my honest impressions, the good and the not so good, so stay tuned for the verdict. But let's get started with the specs. Huion sent me two devices, the Slate 11 and the Slate 13. Both devices run on Android 14, come with 8 GB of RAM and a MediaTek Helio G99 processor with plenty of storage at up to 1 TB on the 13, which is also expandable. With nano-etched anti-glare surfaces to reduce eye strain and add friction for natural drawing feel, and it comes with the H Pencil, which features 4096 levels of pressure sensitivity. The device also comes with a case that doubles as a stand with 3 standing positions. They come preloaded with art applications. The link to these is in the description, so you can go check them out or get one for yourself. But I'm sure you want to hear about what my experience was like first, so let's get stuck into it, starting with the unboxing. Which was satisfying, as you can imagine, getting a kit with everything you need from an artistic perspective. Not just the case and the stylus, but also smudge guard and spare nibs for the stylus. Now, it did take me a few tries to figure out how the stand works, but I can demonstrate for you. There are 2 standing positions. This is basically for upright viewing or tilted viewing, where the case can just sort of rest against one of the 2 ridges of the cover. But the third mode, and the one that artists will need to know, is where you flip it back behind it, fold it in on itself, and it lays flat. And this is how you're gonna have it when you draw on it. And when I first figured that out, I wasn't 100% sure how it would hold up over time. I'm pretty heavy-handed, but we will get to that later. So I took the devices home to set them up, and since I had 2, I set the larger one up for myself to use and the smaller one for my kids who love being creative with me. But after changing the wallpaper to personalize it a little bit, everything I needed was already pre-installed, both art apps and the Google programs I rely on. So after I logged into my main Google account, the whole thing was pretty much set up and ready to go. Now they come pre-installed with Clip Studio Paint, High Paint, Ibis Paint X, and a few more. So my plan was to give them all a go on my travels and let you know what my favorites were. But with the smaller device, I of course made sure to put on Netflix and some coloring apps that I knew my daughter loved, but when I actually showed her to see what she thought, she immediately took to the more advanced drawing apps, and not content with sharing, MJ abandoned his usual tablet and took mine for a spin instead.
What did you ask before?
I said, can I keep it?
You said, can you keep it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, I barely actually got a chance to use my own tablets on the flight over to England because MJ kept asking for it and immersed himself in drawing pictures of Sonic and Mario. And Mario Sonic? So I got my first chance to use my own tablet when we were at the Kuala Lumpur airport for a layover, and I started sketching out ideas for my book cover. So this is where I can explain what my intention was to use this tablet for on my travels. See, over the past year, I have written my debut novel. Kind of obsessively. I've been working on it every day. I'm up to my 5th revision. I literally had never tried creative writing until I was 35, and now I can't stop. I'm addicted. But by the time we were setting off for the UK, I had just sent my manuscript to my developmental editor, which meant for the first time in 10 months, I couldn't work on my manuscript. But that didn't mean I couldn't work on my novel. So my intention was to use the 4 weeks I had up my sleeve to brainstorm book cover ideas, dig deeper into the world building and the setting, and make sure that book 1 is a really solid foundation for the series. Yes, I said series. I started writing a short story last year, and I got so carried away with that, it turned into a 110k word novel, which at this point I'm committing to be the first of, I think, a 4-book series. And honestly, I couldn't be more excited. Anyway, I wanted to mention that simply because everything you're going to be seeing me working on is relating to that. And I, heading off onto this holiday, was really excited to get stuck into it. Some of that work, of course, would involve art, but I still had plenty of writing and world building to do, and I hoped the Slate could work as a second monitor. Now, I looked up tutorials on this, and it seemed that some Android devices had a built-in capacity to connect to Windows computers as external monitors. However, I couldn't find this functionality on the Slate. But after a bit of digging, I did find Space Desk, a third-party app, which turned out to be both free and really functional, working both over Wi-Fi and USB seamlessly. And thankfully, all of the pen functionality seemed to be there too. So using Photoshop as I normally would was also on the table. Now, while I'd love if Huion integrated monitor functionality natively, it actually really wasn't a big problem. And once solved, it worked exactly as I needed it to anyway. Now, I've honestly never spent a lot of time in Android art apps, so I headed into it comparing it to the experience that I think most people watching this would want to hear me compare it to, which is Procreate on the iPad Pro. And with all of the preloaded apps on it ready to go, I had a few different things to try. Most of my work was in a really loose sort of concept art style. After all, I was relaxing on holidays, so I sketched out brainstorms for my first ideas of a book cover that features my protagonist Sam holding the severed claw of one of the nasty aliens in the book, with the giant Urson Starborn Warrior standing behind her. And I painted these up between High Paint and Clip Studio Paint. I also spent some time painting together misty nebulae clouds of a vast universe so I could play around with visualizing the different interstellar territories of my story, which I did in Infinite Painter. All, of course, while spending time in the lovely Cotswolds, my absolute favorite place in the entire world. God, it's so cottagecore! Then we spent the rest of our trip between London and Hampshire, which meant plenty of time to draw on the train. Wow, look at that well-traveled businessman pulling out devices to work in transit. I bet he's working on really important things like stocks and charts. That's probably what people were thinking. What I was actually working on were designs for my Starborn Warriors. I felt like my first cover concept was a bit flat and the soldier design, frankly, a bit boring. I wanted something fresh. Fresh. I went back to the drawing board and started playing around with visual elements for my super soldiers. Oh, you think that's nerdy? Well, when we got back to our Airbnb, I got Kate to take a weird photo of me with the Slate while I was standing on 2 chairs and holding out cricket poles so that I could make sure my Starborn design would work as a giant cosplay outfit. You see, I love seeing cosplays of giant creatures and soldiers at cons and expos, and one day when my book comes out, I plan to make a full cosplay of my giant warriors. But it seems tricky for people to make cosplay where their proportions are enlarged. They're working within the constraints of their, actual proportions. So I'm planning way ahead and hoping that I can proportion my soldiers to work with arm extenders and stilts so I can loom terrifyingly above convention goers in an epic but well-proportioned supersuit, which will hopefully have them saying, "Wow, oh my god, that is so cool, what's it from?" And I'll be like, "My novel, puny human." And I will hand it down to them as they tremble in my glorious presence. At least that's how it goes in my head. And I thoroughly enjoyed spending time sketching my wish fulfillment fantasy. With a rough Starborn concept I liked, I started adding natural elements because the faction of Starborn in my novel come from a world with a culture inspired by the Native American Ojibwe nation. So I wanted to see how the design looked with pelts, ropes, beads, and hanging feathers, which they wear as reminders of their homeworld and as a connection to their former humanity. When we were next on a train to London to go see Matilda the musical, I played around with another book cover concept, but with more of an upwards angle for drama, like our heroes are about to face insurmountable odds, and with my more updated Starborn Warrior concept. I also feel the need to add here that I will actually not be the cover artist for my book. I'm way too picky for that. I found an incredible industry veteran I'm working with who is also helping me refine the design of the Starborn, and I actually gave him this sketch that you see me working on to give him an idea of the vibe that I'm after. So I think it's safe to say I was pretty happy with the vibe I captured, but the design will certainly continue to evolve, and the art will be mind-blowingly cool, so stay tuned for that. As you can tell, I'm very excited about my novel, and we're not too far away now, maybe a couple of months. But if you want to know when it gets released, I've put a link in the description to a newsletter that I've made where you can just sort of sign up to be notified when I release anything novel writing related, be it paperback or audiobook, no spam obviously. But writing has become a huge passion and pursuit for me, and I can't wait to take you on some epic and heartbreaking adventures, so go check that out. But back to the review! Starting off with, what did I think of the apps that I'd been using? I used a bunch of different drawing apps. In the end, I can say that while I enjoyed the brushes and flexibility of Infinite Painter, I spent most of my time between High Paint and Clip Studio Paint. I was honestly really surprised to find that HiPaint felt shockingly close to Procreate and was probably my favorite app for its simplicity and streamlined interface. However, there were some features that weren't in there that were in Clip Studio Paint. Now, Clip Studio Paint felt a little more cumbersome to use, but it is robust. It is the full version of Clip Studio Paint. I mean, the fact that in studio mode you have all of the same features that you have in the desktop version is genuinely insane. Now, I found that too cluttered and confusing for my needs, but they do have a simple version you can switch to, which is much more suited to tablets. And while this was more comfortable, the user experience felt a bit clunkier than I'd hoped. I still don't know how to select multiple layers at once and drag them into a folder, which is a pretty basic thing to do, and it's probably a way to do it, but it just sort of lacks a little bit of that user interface intuitiveness that well-designed apps have. So in the end, I actually found I used both of them. HiPaint for more of the sketching and organic work, and Clip Studio Paint for more of the composition and painting work. So I used the Huion Slate for 4 weeks pretty solidly, mainly for concept art and as a second screen while traveling, and I found the device super convenient and really enjoyable. There were times with higher resolution files or lots of layers, or especially large brush sizes where things did start to lag a bit. But since my approach in general was more laid back, as I was doing a lot of art and concept stuff while I was traveling, it really did everything I wanted to and more. And it was genuinely a joy for me to pull out and dive into whatever project I wanted to realize. The stand, which I was somewhat unsure about at first, really grew on me. It feels really solid. I'm heavy-handed and I can really lean on it, and the fact that it's supported all the way along means it's actually like genuinely quite comfortable to have on your lap or rest on a cushion, and overall feels pretty balanced and way more stable than I expected. The anti-glare screen was perfect in every condition I worked in, which included bright daylight, train lights, and low light, and the surface feels really nice to draw on and works really well to repel smudges and fingerprints. I also found the battery to be super reliable. I only had to charge the pen once, and that's probably because I didn't charge it when I took it out of the box, and I found the Slate capable of standing up to anywhere between 6 to 8 hours of solid use. Now, as much as I really enjoyed drawing with it, using it just as a second screen was as much of a revelation for me while traveling. I really struggle to work without a second screen, and when I travel, I'm usually just working with my laptop. But the fact that this is almost exactly the same size means it can fit perfectly with my laptop in its carry case, and was super convenient to be able to just pull out and work with on the go whenever I needed it. I was especially thankful for its use as a second screen on the flight home, because I had just gotten my developmental edit back and was able to spend over 6 hours of the flight diving right back into working on my manuscript with my editor's notes on the extra screen and staying focused on my writing changes on the laptop. So I've talked plenty about me using it while traveling. How does this stand up to a bit more of a studio environment use? I gave the Slate to Alicia, our in-house digital artist, to work with it for a few days and let me know what she thought. What was she working on, you ask? What do you think I've been getting my in-house digital artist to work on? My book, of course. Alicia has been working with me for a while, actually, to visualize characters and scenes from my upcoming novel, which I hope to one day turn into a special art edition of the book. She normally works on the much larger Huion Kamvas Pro 24, but I asked her to take her work across to the Slate 13 for a few days and tell me how she went. This charming fellow is the design of the aliens in my book. It took quite a bit of playing around to come around to this design, but I love how it looks, and Alicia took our rough final concept into HiPaint to add some color and get used to the Slate. Now, I'm not going to show the finished art because I don't want to give it all away at once. Plus, I plan to do a deep dive on these creatures in a future video, along with a VR sculpted 3D painted project with them, so rest assured you'll see more of their delightful smile around in the near future. She also switched over to Clip Studio Paint to spend some time working on environment concepts. The book takes place in the distant mining colony of the Grand Addictum Core, and the vibe we're going for is vast and oppressive, a vibe I refer to as cosmic brutalism, with vast structures and hard edges that instill a feeling of awe and powerlessness on its workers. Now, as you can see, she also spent some time working in Photoshop in her usual way, but with the Huion Slate acting as a monitor using the same Space Desk app that I used. So she spent a full day using it in various ways and on various concept art pieces. But the next day I challenged her to use it only in Android mode using one app of her choosing to create a hero piece of any moment from the story of her choosing. She chose to work in Clip Studio Paint and to depict the scene where the little girl, Kada, is found by a giant 20-foot tall mother bear and doesn't know if the beast is ferocious or friendly. Much of her sketch work and early work was done in simple mode, moving occasionally into studio mode. But by the end, she was spending all of her time texturing, detailing, and polishing her piece in studio mode. But of course, I think it's best that she speaks from her own experience.
Using the Huion Slate definitely made my workflow much more loose and sketchy, which is really what you want at this stage of concept art. So while all the tools and brushes I needed were there, the experience felt a little bit slower without keyboard shortcuts. And the Slate did start to lag when I used larger brushes or worked on more complex files. I usually work in Photoshop, and when I use the Slate as a tablet for Photoshop, which also used the full power of my desktop PC, my workflow was smooth and completely uninterrupted. I'm also used to Huion's Pentec 3.0 on the Kamvas 24 Pro, which has more pressure sensitivity, and I found the Slate stylus a little bit less sensitive and less comfortable to use. Overall, drawing directly on the Slate and using it only in Android mode was a bit slower than I'm used to, especially with a larger project, but it's still a very capable device, just better suited for lighter, more contained creative work.
So after spending quite a bit of time with the Slate and putting it through its paces in various situations, it's time to get to a verdict. Is it worth it, and who is it for? My experience overall using the Slate was flexible and varied. I used it while traveling, with a lot of concept art, and as a second monitor regularly. It met all of my needs and then some, because I was using it for literally what it was made for. I mean, the website title screen literally says, "Practical, easy, go, a large canvas for on-the-go creation." And that's exactly what I found it to be. Practical, easy, and a delight to travel with. And as you saw, we even used it in a studio environment. But that is, of course, where its limitations became a little clearer. At the end of the day, an Android tablet simply can't compete directly against a high-powered desktop with Photoshop. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to, because it's not an option for me to take my high-powered desktop with me while traveling. At least that's what my wife tells me. Apparently, shoes and clothes are more important to fit in the suitcase. So, in short, my kids and I loved using the Slate as our go-to on-the-go device in loads of different scenarios, and kind of impulsively. Where the itch to be creative came up, the Slate was ready. And Alicia loves, well, she loves her Kamvas Pro 24 and working in Photoshop. But she did prove that the Slate is also very capable of professional quality work, even as just an Android tablet. And if you do want to use your PC and Photoshop to make your life easier, you can certainly do that too. But frankly, and to talk turkey, the biggest victory for the Huion Slate is its price. Let's consider the only real alternative. An iPad Pro costs $1,000. And if you want to do art, an Apple Pencil costs $130 US. But really, you're also going to want a stand, which is going to cost at least $100, probably up to $150 or $200 if you want a good one for art. So you're looking at around $1,300 to have a flexible, portable, on-the-go art setup. And Wacom doesn't even offer a product remotely like this. The Slate 10 is only $299. The Slate 13 is just over $400. Both of them come with the pen and the case, and a smudge guard for good measure. So my verdict is, honestly, I loved it, and I know there will be some people watching this who will be delighted to hear about this device. And there will be others who also prefer, like Alicia, more of a studio working environment with reliable day-to-day leaning on their PC's punch. But as my life personally has become less and less relying on an in-studio environment to create art and more about creating whenever I get the time or wherever I am, the Huion Slate has been a really delightful experience, and will continue to be, because it's mine now. Thanks, Huion. Oh yeah, anyone who got my Carry All Studio, the light fits it frickin' perfectly. I hope you enjoyed my deep dive into these awesome new art toys. If you're interested, of course, the link is in the description where you can go get them for yourself. I vouch for all of Huion's product. They're amazing value and always have been. So a huge thank you to them for sponsoring this video, and a huge thank you to you for watching. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for fun with art and creativity, sign up for my newsletter if you want to see when my novel comes out. But that is it for now, and until next time, I'll see you later.